Okay, so Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho, and of course it has just won Best Picture at the Oscars, so it's making quite a lot of headlines. It's expanded to a lot more cinemas, and it's done that off the back of a very successful run, certainly for a non-English language film in the USA. Looks like it's going to do the same here. And it won the Palme d'Or back at the Cannes Film Festival in May. So the basic premise is it's kind of a tale of two families, the Parks and the Kims. And the Kims are a poorer family. They live in a sub-basement in Korea. And basically, as we open the film, you get a sense for kind of their financial situation, because as they are folding pizza boxes for their employer, basically somebody comes along fumigating the street, and it is suggested that they close the windows, but they decide not to because they will get free fumigation for the bugs that are in their apartment. So that sets the scene quite nicely for their scenario. But shortly after that, the opportunity that transpires is a friend of the son of the family, Ki-woo, is an English tutor for a richer family who live further up the hill, the Park family, and he is departing to study abroad, so they need a new tutor, and he suggests Ki-woo as the tutor. He says he can give him a recommendation. His sister, that's Ki-woo's sister, can forge the documents and pretend that he has a degree from Oxford University and so on and so forth. So he gets the job as this family's English tutor. And the matriarch of that family is a little bit simple, as it's put by Min, the friend of the family, and perhaps a little bit gullible. So basically, over the course of the start of the film, the family start to kind of weasel their way into the household. Park So-dam plays the sister, who then becomes an art therapist for the youngest child of the Park family.
Only child. Illinois, Chicago. Thank you.
And it kind of grows from there. I'm going to leave it there, because I think one of the things about this film is that the less you go in knowing, I think the more you're going to enjoy it. That's the basic premise, and you just say it goes and builds from there. Mark, we'll start with you, because I think everybody here has seen it. Everybody's quite fond of it, I think. What is it about this film that you think has allowed it to kind of break through into the Oscar conversation? What is it about the film that's making it stand out?
That's a very interestingly pitched question, but I think part of the appeal is sort of a similar appeal to The Handmaiden, in that it was the director's return to Korea. And it was a re-entry for Park Chan-wook. It was the re-entry into discussion of Korean history, whereas for Bong, it's been the re-entry into Korean politics, sort of Korean social life. And Bong's films are, the one I haven't seen, which is Barking Dogs Never Bite, but Bong's films are all, I would say, visions of dramatized sociology. He's kind of dramatizing his vision of what the world looks like. And I would say Parasite does this by kind of making its narrative structure mirror its set and production design. It's in the basement, the semi-basement apartment that you mentioned, the Banjiha. They're very cramped, and Bong's very quick to get you to almost know the spaces more than know the characters at first. Yeah,
no, there's a lot of emphasis on the architecture of the Park family home. Yeah. It's a very unique sort of looking design. There's a lot made out about the architect used to live in it, and the housekeeper has continued on into that. So there's a lot of emphasis on that as a kind of a setting.
And the difference between the two as well, because the film's narrative is almost a vertiginous ascent and then a vertiginous descent, in the same way that the trip up to the big Park mansion is exactly that as well. I'd say Bong is pretty much a genius at shot placement, not to speak simply about formally things, but he is a genius at where to put the camera, even in films that don't have the same coherence as Parasite does. Parasite is, I would say, fantastically coherent and fantastically depressing is the word I want to use. It's just a very depressing movie. There's something to be said for giving people hope, but there's also something to be said for telling the truth, if that's what you see the truth as, and that's what I think Bong thinks in this film.
Serena, I'm gonna come to you next, because you mentioned at the start of the show you were in Rotterdam. So I understand you said there's a black and white re-release of this, which has just come out in the States, and I believe that's the version you saw in Rotterdam.
Yeah, it was kind of a world premiere in Rotterdam of the black and white version. So actually, I've seen the black and white version first, and then the in color version next. And I kind of prefer the black and white. I'm not sure, just maybe because it was like first impression of the film. Obviously, I didn't even watch the trailer, I think, before that. So I think it really, the color scheme, I mean, all the grayscale and everything, I think it really fit with like the plot and like the overall, the general atmosphere of the film, like it's a kind of a new noir. And so it was really great, actually. But I can't go like into much details, to be honest, regarding like the color palette of everything, because in the end, in the color version, it's pretty much like that. It doesn't seem to be like something underneath in terms of like colors or color schemes. I'm not sure. Mark and I disagree. So yeah, Mark is gonna explain to everyone what he thinks about like a color scheme in Parasite.
I don't know that it's so much a color scheme as it is just taking pleasure in the color, specifically in the later section. I'll say no more. There's a lot of rainfall. I'll say nothing more than that. There's a kind of harsh orange light which is pervading the whole thing, and it's almost I can't say this without it being a spoiler, but it does not bode well. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I don't know about the I don't know if colour plays a particularly large role, but I think it would be wrong to say it plays no role to me. I think, especially as Mark has mentioned, that those segments, especially when you get to the latter part of the film, I do think they play quite a role. I think Mark hit upon it when he was talking about the idea of kind of descent and ascent, and kind of like where characters are actually physically in relation to each other kind of gets to the heart of the themes of the film. I think there's obviously a lot of class issues going on here, which is actually interesting, because if you look at Snowpiercer, Bong's previous film, it actually deals with quite a lot of similar things in a very different way, but it is
kind
dealing
of like
with
in
quite
a horizontal way.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of like ascending and ascending.
Moving forward to the tray. It's got that like it's strange in that Snowpiercer had more kind of a sort of a. It felt a little bit like somebody combined one of his films with The Raid almost. It's kind of like that kind of like level progression. So this is a little bit more artfully done for my money, but it's definitely got similar things. The other person who's seen here is Betty. Betty, what did you make of the film? Obviously, we've got a few opinions here. I think they're all positive, but in terms of the roles that different things played, what was your biggest takeaway, would you say?
Well, I think that after Cannes and the Oscars and the review so far, it's not going to be my contribution that is going to make anybody think, oh man, well now I really have to watch Parasite. But, and this might be a bit controversial, I thought it was pretty good.
Shock.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned how difficult it is to talk about it, because you get the most of it out of it going in completely blind. That being said, I've seen it twice already. Once back in January, and the second time as recently as a couple of days ago. And the second viewing revealed something to me that I thought was very interesting. So you've mentioned Park Chan-wook, and I feel like anyone who's seen The Handmaiden or, say, Old Boy might be familiar with this kind of film structure where everything is constantly escalating. And people would call that a twisty narrative structure, but not quite, because it's unexpected in a completely different way. And I feel like it already within the first, say, 20 or 30 minutes is when this constant escalation begins. So there's really not much I can tell you about it plot-wise. But watching it a second time is pretty interesting, because you know everything that's going to happen. And you're now privy to what some of the things that you thought were completely inconsequential actually mean and actually signify. And we all know that films like that, films that are very tightly written, films that don't struggle with continuity at all, even though you feel like they should, given their complexity. We all know that these are films that are greatly admired in general. And as you can imagine, these are films that are incredibly difficult to write, which is why I am, amongst other things, really pleased that Parasite got an award for Best Original Screenplay, which went to Bong and his co-writer, Jin-won. If nothing else, it's obviously beautifully shot, it's wonderfully cinematic, but also fantastically written. And I'm extremely pleased that Parasite has become one of those films that needs a separate Wikipedia page for all the accolades that it's receiving and it's been nominated for.
I'm pleased that you've brought up the structure of the film there, because I don't know what any of you folks thought, but the thing that kind of struck me about it, especially on a second viewing, is it does really, to me, almost feel like you've got two films joined together. There's a segment in the middle, and of course I'm going to have to talk about this obliquely, but there's a segment in the middle which kind of signals a change from what was going on into something else, right? And there's quite a sharp change. For me, I don't know if it's actually a constant escalation. For me, there is quite a sharp change. But the thing that I find quite impressive about it is it's very rare that I've come across a film which does that, which does this kind of like very abrupt change in what is going on. And I'm not trying to make it like, flying saucers come down or something. I mean, obviously that's not what I'm talking about. But it's very rare to come across a film that makes that step change in what is going on, and maybe even kind of the dynamics of the characters, and actually makes that work without it being a jarring tonal shift or it being a jarring shift in what you maybe perceive the genre to be. Because to me, I thought this was a bit of a genre-bending film in the sense that you think it's one thing, and then it starts to blend in aspects of different types of cinema, a different type of narrative, and to me, it works, and I think that's probably why the screenplay ended up, winning as many things as it has, because I think it does that really rather well. Is that something that you folks picked up on, or is that just me? This kind of like this idea of there being a step change at some point in the film.
I'm actually kind of confused somehow, because I hear so many people like saying genre bending and so on and so forth, but when first time I watched the film, I was totally into that, and I've never perceived any change of pace or any change of genre, like nowhere in the film. I think it was really structured, and everything like fit in the right place, and was like very tied together and very cohesive. And to be honest, I didn't perceive it like as it being one genre at first in the first half, and then suddenly changing into something different like midway. So every time I'm really confused, and I want to take the chance to ask you, Jim. So what do you think these different genres are like tied together inside Parasite? Because I'm
that in some ways your confusion about what I'm saying speaks to what I'm saying, right? Because that's the thing. I don't think you do notice like a sudden shift. That's the thing. And there's little elements of the heist film here. There's a little elements of the horror film. There's little elements of the social drama, and some of these things, especially when you're dealing with them all simultaneously, it could be quite a jarring shift. The key thing is it's not, though. And I think you're right. It's very structured. It flows very nicely. I think that the bit I'm referring to in the middle, where there's a step change, is more of a shift in character dynamics. You think somebody is on top, so to speak, and you think you've got an understanding of where the characters sit in relation to one another, and then basically something happens which kind of throws a firecracker into that scenario. Now, after that, again, I don't think it's kind of like genre bending in the sense it's swinging wildly between them, but it's then when it starts to maybe lean more on some elements than it was. Like the initial part is more of the idea of, these little heist elements I've spoken about, and social drama, and it starts to maybe shift away from that a little bit in the second half. But part of what makes this film so impressive and so entertaining is it does that with barely a wrinkle in your engagement in the film. So it's not that I think there is a shift, it's more it does blend those elements together very well. So I would say the fact that you're saying you've not perceived them, that's basically my point, really.
Okay, I think I'm gonna say something, and then if it's a spoiler, honestly, I don't think it's a spoiler, because what I'm gonna say doesn't happen in the film, so it could be like a spoiler.
We've got the beep button at the ready.
Okay,
it's fine.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, as I said, I haven't seen any trailers, so I try not to know anything about the film, as we should usually do. And so when I was watching the film, my idea of that was that I was kind of expecting like the Kim family to kind of kill everyone in the Park family, and then kind of like assume the identity of the Park family and try to live inside their house. So that was what I was expecting from the film. So when that didn't happen, I was like, okay, nothing weird going on here. I felt like the dynamics of like the class dynamics inside the film were pretty kind of common and what you can expect for something like that. Okay, the kind of parasitic relationship, fine.
Whilst I take your point, the idea that nothing weird goes on in this film is quite a remarkable one.
I mean, on top of like, well, they're trying to survive, so they're trying to just find a job, and that's a very clever way of finding a job, like trying to recommend and kind of exploiting this, you know, this thing of like, basically we live in this world where we need recommendations and we need like referees and referrals and this kind of stuff. So they're just basically, the Kims are just exploiting this kind of society we are all living on. So I felt like that was really clever, and to be honest, not unexpected. And not even weird, just something really, really, really clever and smart. And I'm like, maybe we should do that more often, without the ending of the film, of course. But yeah, so no, yeah, that's it. I mean, I was watching that, expecting something different, and then I was like, oh yeah, cool, amazing, like a critique to our society. So I think it was great, and but didn't kind of felt any kind of like John banding or something. So just
while we're on the topic of kind of the accolades it's had, right? Serena's assertion that nothing weird happens in the film aside, and then chooses the most mundane aspect of the film to illustrate this. But you know, let's gloss over that, shall we? What do we make of the acting performances? Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, of course, is because we're going to talk about the Oscars after we talk about this film. And what's quite remarkable about it is it got all these nominations, but it didn't get any acting nominations. That's not to say that it hasn't got them elsewhere. I think, I forget which Guild Awards it was, but it got an Ensemble Cast Award somewhere. And for me, I would say that the outstanding, I mean, everybody's very good, but I would say the outstanding performances for me are Kang-ho, who plays the father of the Kim family. I think he has a lot to do, and then maybe has a lot of different interactions to deal with, and I think he deals with that really very well. And then after that, my personal highlight would probably be Park So-dam, who plays the daughter of the Kim family, and is kind of the first one to kind of like work her way into the household after her brother. So, Mark, what did you make of that? Because I feel like these have kind of gone unacknowledged a little bit.
Yeah, they have. I would add, I completely agree about Park So-dam and about Song Kang-ho, who I want to talk about a little bit more because I love him. But I would also talk about Cho Yeo-jeong, who plays Mrs. Park. She plays a very particular role, which is she's kind of, I don't want to be mean, but she's kind of a zombified wine mum. Really, like she has nothing to do all day. She has a housekeeper to take care of her kids and take care of the home. Nathan, her husband, Mr. Park, he's out all the time, so she's got nothing to do. So you can, there's a throwaway line somewhere that she likes to get drunk during the day, and you're like, yep, absolutely, you can tell, because she's always asleep.
We are in fact introduced to her asleep on a table,
yeah,
I believe.
And it's like her performance is so, she's, as you said, Min, Kiwoo's friend describes her as pretty simple, and everybody takes against her, but it's performed so well. It's performed for comedy for sure, but also elucidates a thing in the film, which is the way in which as well as being a class critique, it's kind of it doesn't emphasize this, but it is definitely there. It's a critique of patriarchy too, and the way in which Mr. Park just does not pay attention to her at all, which becomes a point of contention between Kim Ki-taek and Mr. Park on their drives when he becomes a driver. I love Sang Kang-ho's performance in this. He keeps on talking about plans. Plans are mentioned an awful lot in the film, and he speaks with a kind of reverence for his children and has a hope for his children that they will have some plan to get out of the semi-basement apartment that they're living in, and he sees this the belt of faith, as Mrs. Park puts it, as a chance to get out and to get to university, which Kiwoo wants to. He says, once he has the forged document that sister gives him, he says, I don't think if this is fraudulence, I'm going to come back and actually attend this university. And you can see the admiration in the father's eyes. There's also a moment later on, which I won't go into, in which he cries slightly, and it's extremely moving. And it's also worth mentioning that Song is probably like one of the biggest superstar actors in Korea, and I hope this means that he's going to get more appreciation in future.
One thing that I find very admirable about Parasite that I don't think we've really mentioned yet is how funny it is, without that ever being in dissonance with the rest of the tone of the film, which is obviously very creepy, actually very sad, very bleak, and at times even rage-inducing. But when I saw it in theaters, there were people who managed to laugh from the very beginning till the very end of the film, and I understand. I understand why that is the case, and that's, I think, something else that speaks to the quality of the acting is that there were so many things that were said in a way that was rather, that felt inundated with irony and with the intention of being funny while still being incredibly touching and incredibly moving. For example, the forged diploma scene, which gets a bit of a laugh out of you, but is also really bittersweet in a way.
Yeah, I think you've kind of the one thing we hadn't mentioned you've brought up beautifully there, and I think that speaks to the whole blend of things that are going on. I find it hard to believe myself that somebody could watch this film and not get something out of it. Now, as is the way with these things that win Best Picture and get bigged up, there's quite a lot of hype around this. So whether somebody is as blown away by it as I think a lot of us are, I don't know, but I find it hard to believe that somebody could go into this film and dislike it. While we're on the topic of people being blown away by it, we've got our resident Oscars fan in Amanda.
Hey.
Who
I like them all.
Who loves the Oscars.
I love awards. I've won to win awards.
As do I. I love to hate them. How did you find it at the Oscars? What did you take it like? Because this kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, 1917 was meant to win Best Picture by all reliable indicators.
I think the fact that it won, to me, also, and the response, the excitement of people who were in the room, the excitement of people all around the world, that this is the first international film that won ICE. I think it shows, again, whether or not you love or hate this particular the thing, how important on a world stage this is, and how excited I think we all are that that this group of people are finally recognizing international films, good films, and not just films that maybe had been, given a little bit more marketing money in the New York Times.
Here's my question, though. Did anyone predict it in the Cinetopia ballot?
They did, and I think that's a nice segue into the fact that I have been, the past couple of networking nights and our first Cine Quiz, did run a Oscar ballot to ask everybody what they thought, and we said we would announce it on this show. So I know everyone's super excited. I believe half of you did one, and I know we're all just dying to know. Well, nobody in this room won. I didn't even win. And Natalia... Well, we had a tie, so it was two people who won. Natalia Lewandowska, and I believe she also had another ballot. She was doing it at the Film House, but also Nele and Wonk. I would say, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, but I will be emailing you both because you both got 15 out of 24. Although did not expect Parasite to win, so they did not choose a Parasite as that was not one of their winning ticks, if you will, from the ballot. But again, I think we just had a lot of cynicism towards the Oscars, which I'm sure Jim can
why
add
are you looking at me when you say that, Amanda?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Why are you looking at me when you say cynicism about the Oscars?
On what you think about this.
I mean, Parasite winning's good. I mean, beyond, to be honest with you, the thing I was surprised about was the fact that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood didn't win a screenplay Oscar. Not because I wanted it to win. I think it's an overlong and self-indulgent mess, so it shouldn't have won a Oscar, but I'm rather surprised it didn't. It's interesting when you look at the results, though, because if you look at what's won Best Picture over the past 4 years or so, there's a certain amount of surprises there, actually, because, I mean, that includes Moonlight, it includes The Shape of Water, then you've got the aberration that is Green Book, and then all of a sudden we've got Parasite. So, to an extent, like, maybe the Oscars is more surprising than I give it credit for, but at the same time, you know, I don't know. I didn't really take anything from it. The acting nominations are still overwhelmingly white. The directing awards are still overwhelmingly male. I mean, sure, it awards Parasite, but, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Well, I think that just about ends our Oscar analysis. It seems we have a room.
I don't think I'm going to be getting an invite anytime soon.
No, I don't think you will be.